For 4 hours, I fought for the life of a 5-year-old boy. I was late to my own wedding, and 20 members of the groom's family blocked my path. "Get out of here! Our son has already married someone else," they shouted. But they had no idea whose child I had just saved. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the phone shattered the silence of the residence lounge. Zenziel Vance bolted upright on the sagging sofa, her mind hazy, trying to remember where she was and why her head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. After only 3 hours of fragmented sleep, the world outside the window was a thick, ink-black Georgia night. In the hallway, the rattle of gurneys and the frantic thud of footsteps had already begun. Someone was shouting, "Fast! We need her now!" in that specific, high-pitched tone reserved only for life-or-death emergencies. She threw on her white coat and ran toward the emergency room. There, she found the chief of surgery, Dr. Langston Brooks, standing by the nurse's station. His face bore the look of a man delivering news of a national disaster. 5-year-old boy, ruptured spleen, motor vehicle accident on the I-85 about an hour ago, Dr. Brooks said, his words coming out in clipped, hurried bursts. "The trauma team is stretched thin, Zenziel. Can you handle this?" She nodded without a second thought, even as a flicker of her own life flashed through her mind. The wedding, the ballroom at the Grand Regency, her mother, who had begged her to be the flawless bride. And then there was Soraya Duclair, her future mother-in-law, with her perpetual air of disapproval. "I can do it," Zenziel said firmly. "But isn't your ceremony today?" Dr. Brooks hesitated. "I'll make it," she snapped, already sprinting toward the scrub sinks. In the hallway leading to the surgical suite, a man in a tailored, expensive suit was pacing frantically. He was a large man, but he looked utterly lost, as if the ground beneath him had turned to sand. On the gurney lay a boy so pale from blood loss that he looked like he was carved out of marble. Zenziel scanned the charts the nurses shoved into her hands as they moved. Her heart tightened. 10 more minutes of delay, and there would be nothing left to save. The surgery lasted 4 hours. 4 hours in which nothing existed except the surgical field, the tiny, delicate vessels of a child, and the monotonous, rhythmic beep of the monitors. Her back ached so intensely she wanted to double over, her neck was slick with sweat, and by the 3rd hour, her fingers began to tremble from the sheer strain. But she didn't allow herself to think of anything but that small body on the table. She had to stitch those torn vessels millimeter by millimeter with the calculated precision she had spent years perfecting. When the anesthesiologist finally said, "Vitals are stabilizing," Zenziel exhaled so deeply it felt as if she hadn't breathed for the entire duration. "Good work, Vance," Dr. Brooks said, clapping her on the shoulder as she pulled off her mask and gloves in the hallway. "You pulled that boy back from the brink. Now get out of here and get to your wedding." Nurse Keisha caught up with her at the lounge and handed over her phone. The screen was a chaotic mess of missed calls from unknown numbers, likely the groom's relatives who were already gathered and waiting. "At least 20 people called, honey," Keisha said, her eyes full of sympathy. "I know today is your big day. Go." "Thanks," Zenziel replied. She didn't call back. Explaining over the phone was useless, and she was out of time. She changed right there in the lounge, her fingers stiff with exhaustion as she struggled with the buttons of her wedding dress. She fumbled with the tiny hooks on the back. The dress was simple, no massive crinolines or heavy embroidery. She had chosen it specifically so she could put it on without help, and now she was grateful for that foresight. There wasn't a minute left for makeup. She pulled her hair into a tight, sleek ponytail and wiped her face with wet wipes, trying to erase the exhaustion of 4 hours in the OR. She ran to the parking lot and jumped into her old car, which mercifully cranked on the first try. Driving across Atlanta from the hospital district toward Buckhead, she mentally rehearsed her explanation for Soraya Duclair. Her future mother-in-law had always looked at her like a nuisance, a temporary glitch in her precious son's life. "Kellen will understand," Zenziel whispered to herself, weaving through the heavy Saturday traffic. He told me he was proud of my work. He'll take my side. We've talked about this 1,000 times. She believed it so firmly that when she saw the crowd gathered at the entrance of the hotel, her first thought was, "They're waiting for me." But when Soraya Duclair stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, followed by a phalanx of relatives, Kellen's older brother Sterling and great-auntie Odette, Zenzile realized this wasn't a greeting. It was a wall. "We spent $50,000 on this venue, and where have you been gallivanting?" Soraya's voice vibrated with suppressed rage. "Do you think you're the only person who matters? Everyone is sitting in there like fools while you're out doing God knows what." "It was an emergency surgery," Zenzile said, her voice steady despite the shaking deep in her chest. "A 5-year-old boy with a ruptured spleen. He was brought in at 5 this morning." "I don't give a damn about your surgeries," Soraya cut her off. "It's always an excuse with you. A shift, an operation, a dissertation that nobody asked for. You chose the wrong day to play hero." "A doctor should understand that a wedding day is sacred," Sterling interjected, stepping forward with the arrogance of a man used to his word being law. "Leaving my brother standing there in front of all these guests? It's a disgrace to the Duclair name. How is he supposed to look people in the eye now?" "A career-obsessed woman like this isn't fit to be a wife," Auntie Odette added, her voice dripping with the peculiar satisfaction some people find in saying cruel things. "I said it from the start. Kellen, she's not the one." Zenzile felt her face flush hot. Dozens of eyes were pinned on her, each one carrying a pre-delivered sentence with no right to appeal. Years of patience, the mocking comments about her night shifts, the insinuations that a decent woman doesn't work 20 hours a day, the constant comparisons to Jasmine, who could cook a 5-course meal and never spoke out of turn. It had all been for nothing. She had hoped that her professional excellence would eventually earn their respect. She was wrong. "Where is Kellen?" Zenzile asked, her voice sounding foreign to her ears. "I want to see him. Let him tell me himself." Soraya laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut deeper than any insult. "My son has already exchanged rings with Jasmine, a woman who actually knows the meaning of family and respect, a woman who wouldn't abandon her husband for total strangers in a hospital." From the ballroom, she could hear the muffled sound of music, laughter, and the MC announcing toasts. A celebration was happening. Guests were cheering, and her groom was standing there next to another woman. Zenzile stood frozen. The world around her lost its sharp edges, becoming a blur as if she were looking through a fogged-up window. "The papers are being signed as we speak. They'll be legally wed by next month," Sterling said, shoving his hands into his pockets with blatant contempt. "Now get out of here before we call security. Don't cause a scene." She remembered Kellen proposing to her at a restaurant overlooking the city. She remembered him on one knee, his voice trembling as he promised to protect her, promised he wouldn't let his mother interfere, promised he was proud of her career. 3 years. For 3 years she had believed every word. And now, after 4 hours of absence, he was putting a ring on Jasmine's finger. Had Jasmine always been the backup plan? Did they force him? Or was he simply too weak to stand up to his mother, as he had always been? These questions gnawed at her, but Zenzile didn't cry. She knew that if she spoke a single word, her voice would break. Suddenly, the roar of a powerful engine cut through the tension. Everyone turned. A black Rolls-Royce pulling into the hotel driveway was an event in itself, even in Buckhead. A middle-aged man in a dark charcoal suit stepped out. It was the same man Zenzile had seen pacing the hospital hallway just a few hours ago. He walked straight toward Zenzile and bowed his head in a deep, respectful gesture. It was the kind of bow one gives when words are insufficient for the gratitude felt. "Caspian Sterling," he introduced himself quietly, his voice carrying the rasp of a man who hadn't slept. "You saved my son's life today. I came to thank you." The Duclair family froze, exchanging bewildered looks. In Atlanta, everyone knew the name Sterling Homes. Half of the new luxury high-rises in the city were built by his company. His face was a staple of the business news. Zenzile saw the immediate transformation in Soraya's face. Fear replaced rage. The lips that had been hurling insults just seconds ago began to tremble. "Zenzile, honey!" Her mother-in-law's voice was suddenly honeyed, nauseatingly sweet. "Our dear daughter-in-law, wait a moment." Caspian Sterling swept a cold gaze over the crowd, lingering on each face as if memorizing them. "I wanted to thank the doctor in front of her family," he said firmly. "I expected to find a celebration. Instead, I find this. A group of people hounding a woman who 4 hours ago pulled my child back from the grave." "We were just—" Soraya started, but Caspian cut her off. "I heard everything you said. Every single word." He turned back to Zenzile. "You don't have to stay here. If you wish, I can take you wherever you need to go." Zenzile looked at the ballroom, where the music was still playing. She looked at the wall of people who had just told her to get out, and then at Soraya with her fake, desperate smile. This hypocrisy, the instant pivot from get out to dear daughter, was worse than any insult. It showed the true price of their respect. "Zenzile, baby, come back," Soraya called out, as Zenzile silently turned and walked toward the black car. Zenzile didn't answer and didn't look back. She walked with her head held high, realizing one thing. Some doors close on their own for a reason, and you shouldn't stand outside begging to be let back in. They ended up at a quiet coffee shop in a leafy neighborhood. It was nearly empty. Outside, the oak trees swayed in the breeze, and the world seemed surreal after the chaos of the morning. Caspian ordered 2 coffees, waited for the server to leave, and placed an envelope on the table. $80,000, he said simply. "It's less than the value of my son's life, but please, accept it as a token of my gratitude." Zenzile shook her head, not touching the envelope. "I can't take that. I'm a surgeon. It's my job to save lives. If I turn this into a market, if I take money for every operation beyond my salary, my conscience becomes a commodity. And without a conscience, what kind of doctor am I?" He tucked the envelope away without offense, only nodding with a respect that was clearer than any words. "I wanted to thank you at your wedding, in front of your people," Caspian said quietly, stirring his coffee. "I found out at the hospital that today was your big day. I thought I'd say a few words so everyone would know exactly what kind of woman you are." He trailed off, waving a hand at the memory of the Duclairs. "They thought you were just some ordinary resident with no one to stand up for her." Zenzile smiled bitterly. Someone they could push around and replace whenever it was convenient. Caspian remained silent, offering no platitudes about how everything would be okay. That silence was better than any words. It gave her room to breathe. "Is there anything else I can do?" he finally asked. "Take me to my mother's house in Cascade," Zenzile requested. "Before the Duclairs show up there and cause a scene, they're capable of it." He nodded and called his driver. Zenzile looked out the window at the people going about their business. Students with backpacks, couples holding hands. For the first time on this endless day, she felt like she could actually draw a full breath. The man across from her asked for nothing, judged nothing, and didn't try to exploit her vulnerability. He was just there. As the car moved through the streets, Zenzile dialed her mother's number. Mansa Vance's voice, thick with worry, answered immediately. "Baby, where are you? Why haven't you been picking up? I didn't know what to think. Did you make it to the Regency?" "Mama," Zenzile swallowed the lump in her throat. "There was an emergency surgery early this morning. A little boy. I couldn't walk away. The groom's family, they have some issues with that. I'm coming home. I'll tell you everything." Mansa was silent for a moment, and Zenzile heard her heavy sigh. It was the sigh of a woman who already understood everything, but knew not to push over the phone. "All right, I'll be here. Don't you let anyone trample on you, you hear me? Not a soul. A person goes where they are valued, not where they are tolerated." The car stopped at the gate of a modest, well-kept bungalow on the outskirts of the city. This was the house where Zenzile had grown up, where the floors creaked in familiar patterns, and where a photo of her father still hung in the hallway, the man who had passed away from a heart attack during his shift at the plant 10 years ago. Her mother met her at the door wearing an old robe and holding a dish towel. A retired nurse and a widow, Manza had raised her daughter alone, working double shifts at the local clinic. When she saw her daughter's disheveled wedding dress and exhausted face, she didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door and ushered her into the warmth and safety of home. Mansa poured tea into a large, chipped mug and set a plate of peach cobbler on the table. The cobbler she had made that morning for the celebration that didn't happen. She sat across from her daughter, her weathered hands folded on the tablecloth. "Tell me everything." Zenzil told her about the 5 a.m. call, the 4 hours of surgery, the crowd at the hotel, Soraya's "get out," the ring on another woman's finger, and the moment Caspian Sterling stepped out of the Rolls-Royce. Mansa listened without interrupting, her face growing pale, but her spine remained straight as an arrow. "A good person reveals themselves in a crisis," Mansa said finally, "and a weak one hides. Your Kellen hid behind his mama's skirt. Not everything that glitters is gold, baby. I told you to look closer at him, but you were in love and didn't want to hear it." Outside, the sound of car doors slamming and a chorus of voices erupted. Several people were arguing at once. Mansa stood up, smoothed her robe, and headed for the door like a soldier going into battle. "Stay here. I'll handle this." Through the sheer curtains, Zenzil watched her mother stand on the porch with her arms crossed. At the gate stood Soraya Duclair with a forced, pained smile, and behind her was Sterling's SUV. The mother-in-law was babbling something about apologies and misunderstandings, about how she had always considered Zenzile a daughter. "This morning, you told my daughter to get out." Mansa's voice was calm and steady. "And now she's like a daughter to you? Your memory seems very selective." "This is a family matter," Sterling cut in, trying to take charge. "Zenzil is our sister-in-law. We have a right to speak to her." "If there was no wedding, there is no sister-in-law," Mansa snapped. "And if your Kellen already swapped rings with another woman in front of everyone, what is there to talk about? Did you value her when you were chasing her out of the parking lot? Or did you only start valuing her when you found out whose child she saved?" Caspian Sterling's driver, still parked by the curb, stepped out and firmly but politely asked the visitors to leave. Seeing a man of that stature guarding a modest house, Soraya turned even paler, realizing her plan had failed. They drove away in silence. "That's that," Mansa said, coming back inside and locking the door. "Live your life, baby. Those people aren't your family and never were." Zenzil hugged her mother, burying her face in her shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of laundry detergent and home. "I'm sorry, Mama. You worked so hard on all that food. What are you apologizing for?" Mansa stroked her hair. "You saved a child. You didn't run off to a party. Live with a clean conscience, that's all that matters. And we'll eat that cobbler ourselves." The days passed slowly in that quiet neighborhood. Zenzil took a week of medical leave and spent it with her mother, making breakfast and reminding her to take her blood pressure medication. The neighbors already knew about the canceled wedding. News traveled fast through the fences and over the porches. Some offered sympathetic looks. Others watched with poorly hidden curiosity. Mansa handled them all with blunt honesty. "My daughter did the right thing. She saved a life. The rest is none of your business." Zenzil's phone blew up with calls. Unknown numbers. Soraya, Sterling, distant relatives she barely knew. She blocked them one by one until Kellen's name appeared on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Zenzila." His voice was raspy and rushed. "Please, listen to me. My mother had a total breakdown. The ceremony was just to calm her down. It didn't mean anything. We can fix the paperwork. I don't want to lose you." "If it didn't mean anything?" Zenzil interrupted, her own voice surprisingly calm. "Why did you put a ring on another woman's finger in front of 100 guests?" "They forced me. My mother said she couldn't handle the shame. She clutched her heart." "Where were you while I was operating on that child for 4 hours, Kellen?" He was silent for a second. "I was nervous. I didn't know what to do. My mother was screaming. Jasmine showed up. You should have been at the hospital waiting outside the OR, she said. Just being there would have been enough. But you chose to stay home and marry someone else. I don't blame your mother, Kellen. I blame you. Zenzile, give me a second chance. I'll change, I promise. The chance ended when you took the easy way out. She hung up and felt a strange sense of relief. Not joy, not triumph, just a hollow space where the pain used to be. One evening, as the sun was setting and the air smelled of blooming jasmine, Caspian Sterling arrived without his driver. He was in a simple SUV, wearing a plain shirt with the sleeves rolled up, carrying a bag of groceries, meat, vegetables, and even a box of good tea. Mansa gave him the evaluating look of an experienced woman who had seen everything and couldn't be bought with gifts. I wanted to properly introduce myself, he explained, setting the bag on the kitchen table. And to see if you needed any help around the house. I noticed the fence is leaning. I can send some men to fix it. And what are your intentions? Mansa asked point blank. Don't you try to sweet-talk me. I'm a simple woman. I like things honest. I'm not trying to buy my way in, he replied just as directly. I just think that in a hard moment, a person could use some support from the outside. No pressure, no conditions. Your daughter saved my son's life, and I witnessed her being chased away from her own wedding. That's just wrong. Mansa stayed quiet, looking at his hands, large, calloused, clearly familiar with hard work despite his wealth. You're not a show-off, she said finally, softening slightly. You seem like a man who loves his child. Fine, we'll see what kind of man you are. Later, while her mother was in the kitchen, Caspian said to Zenzile, I'm willing to wait as a friend for as long as you need. If you don't want to see me, I won't come back. Just say the word. Don't disappear, she said after a pause. I just need time. A lot of time. At the door, Mansa pulled her daughter aside. Don't rush. Don't lose your head. Money doesn't make the man. Look closely this time, or you'll get burned again. A week later, Zenzile returned to work. She put on her white coat, walked the familiar hallways, and felt like she was back where she belonged. But on her first day, Dr. Brooks called her into his office with a grim expression. A complaint has been filed, he said, not looking up from his desk. The Duclair family. They claim you abandoned your post on your wedding day, causing moral damage to the hospital, and that you used your professional position to establish ties with wealthy patients. It's nonsense, of course, but we have to follow protocol. Zenzile felt a wave of indignation. The accusation of using her position cut deep. She had saved a child at the expense of her own happiness, and now they were accusing her of greed. The hospital has already pulled the records, Dr. Brooks continued. The surgical logs, the boy's history, the security footage, everything confirms your version. But there will be an official inquiry. At the hearing, the chief medical officer, the legal team, and Sterling Duclair were present. Sterling sat in the corner, avoiding Zenzile's eyes, mumbling about family honor, but unable to provide any proof of negligence. Zenzile calmly laid out the timeline from the 5 a.m. call to the moment she left the OR. She mentioned that the patient's father, Caspian Sterling, could testify as a witness. At the mention of that name, Sterling Duclair lowered his head and didn't say another word. The board's decision was unanimous. Dr. Vance's actions were entirely consistent with her professional duty. The complaint was dismissed. As she left the office, her legs were shaking, not from joy, but from the sheer exhaustion of a battle she hadn't started. Caspian was waiting by his car at the entrance. All sorted? He asked. All sorted. They threw it out. Good. Let's go get some real food. You need a proper meal, not hospital cafeteria food. She laughed for the first time in weeks. You're a very practical man, Caspian. Everything is so simple with you. 2 weeks later, Kellen cornered her at the employee entrance. He looked thin, disheveled, wearing a wrinkled jacket his mother would have never approved of. My mother is in the hospital, he said hurriedly. Her heart. She's at the cardiac center crying all the time. Jasmine went back to her parents. She couldn't take the pressure. We canceled the paperwork with the other woman. I'm choosing you now, Zenzile. I'm choosing you. Zenzil looked at the man she had once planned to spend her life with and felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. "You're not choosing me, Kellen. I'm not a backup plan. You're choosing comfort because everything else fell apart. When your mother pushed, you chose her. When I needed you at the hospital, you stayed home. Now that Jasmine is gone and your mother is sick, you're coming back. That's not a choice. It's desperation. Give me a chance to be stronger. I can learn." She shook her head. "There are things you can change, Kellen, but there are moments that, once missed, can never be brought back. That moment was the morning of our wedding." "Is there someone else?" he asked desperately. "That's none of your business anymore. It doesn't matter." She turned and walked away, and with every step, she felt lighter. A few weeks later, Mansa was rushed to the hospital with a hypertensive crisis. Zenzil spent the night by her bed, holding her hand. She hadn't called anyone, not wanting to be a burden. But in the morning, Caspian appeared with a thermos of homemade chicken broth and a bag of fruit. A nurse had mentioned it to him. "How did you find out?" Zenzil asked, rising from her chair. "Doesn't matter. How is she?" He didn't offer unsolicited advice or pushy recommendations. He just set the thermos down and told Mansa, "Get well soon. Zenzil misses you." Mansa smirked. "He's a sensible man, not a talker." When he left, she told her daughter, "A person is seen by their actions, baby, not their words. This one acts." After her mother was discharged, Caspian invited them both to his home for a lunch to celebrate his son's full recovery. The house was large but lacked the gaudy luxury Zenzil had expected. It was a solid, warm home on a large lot with pine trees and a wooden deck. Malik, the 5-year-old, ran out shouting, "The doctor's here!" and hugged Zenzil's legs so hard she nearly tipped over. Lunch was simple. Caspian set the table himself with the same focus he probably used to sign million-dollar contracts. He told them about his life. His wife had passed away from cancer 3 years ago, and he had been raising his son alone. "I know what that's like," Mansa said quietly. "Raising one alone. My husband's been gone 10 years. After lunch, Mansa intentionally went to look at the garden with Malik, leaving Zenzile and Caspian alone on the terrace. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the trees. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who don't feel the need to fill the gaps with empty noise. One evening, Caspian arrived with a specific medication Mansa had mentioned was out of stock at her local pharmacy. He had remembered the name and the dosage. Mansa took the pills, but immediately sat him down at the kitchen table. "What do you want from my daughter?" she asked. "Are you looking to marry her or just passing time?" Caspian didn't look away. "If Zenzil allows it, I'd like to be by her side. If she's not ready, I'll wait. I'll be a friend. I won't push." "She doesn't need a rich man," Mansa said sternly. "She needs someone who won't run when things get hard." "I keep my word," he said simply. A month later, Soraya Duclair called, asking for a meeting. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its metallic edge. Zenzil agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the hospital, a public place. Soraya looked like a different woman, aged, slumped, her face puffy from her health issues. The arrogance was gone. "I was wrong that day," she said, her eyes on her cup. "I should have said this a long time ago." "Why did you do it?" Zenzil asked calmly. "I was afraid of what the relatives would say. I thought my son should marry a proper girl from a good family, not just some doctor. When I found out about the surgery, about the boy and the Sterlings, I realized how foolish I'd been. If it hadn't been for you, that child might not have made it, and I was chasing you out of a parking lot. Kellen, he's in Memphis now. He asked for a transfer. He blames me for everything. Jasmine never came back." Soraya looked up, tears in her eyes. "I'm not asking for things to go back. I'm just asking for forgiveness." Zenzil looked at the woman who had once been an immovable wall. She didn't feel any satisfaction in her tears. She thought of her own mother, of the sleepless nights. "I don't hold a grudge," Zenzil said finally. "I forgive you for my own peace, not so things can go back. Don't look for me anymore. Let's just live our separate lives." That spring, Dr. Brooks offered Zenzil a 3-month fellowship at a top cardiovascular center in D.C. It was the chance of a lifetime. "Go, baby," Mansa said. "I can handle myself. Caspian will look after me." Caspian said simply, "Do what you have to do. I'm not going anywhere." The 3 months in D.C. were a test for her career and for the fragile bond building between her and Caspian. He called once a week just to ask how she was. His steady, distant presence kept her from feeling lonely in the big city. A week after she returned to Atlanta, Caspian showed up at her mother's house. He had no flowers or gifts, just a clean shirt, and the look of a man who had made a decision. "I don't want to drag this out," he said, standing in the middle of the kitchen. "I'm asking for your consent and for Mansa's blessing, for you to be my wife." Zenzile didn't cry. Something inside her just went quiet, finally finding its rhythm. Mansa watched them for a long time, then nodded. "It's her choice, but I'm not against it." "I don't want a big wedding," Zenzile said. "No luxury, just family. A place where I won't be betrayed." "I keep my word," he repeated. The wedding was quiet. A small restaurant outside the city. 30 people. Close friends and colleagues. Zenzile wore a simple, elegant dress, and her mother held her hand tight. Not a single person who had caused her pain was in that room. Caspian kept his speech short. "I'm not a man of many words, but I promise this. I will come home to you every single night." A year later, on the anniversary of the day she was supposed to marry Kellen, Zenzile sat at dinner with Caspian and her mother in their new home. Mansa had moved in with them. There was plenty of room, and now she had people to look after her. She smiled more often now. Malik followed her around like a shadow, calling her Nana Mansa and demanding bedtime stories. "A year ago today was probably not the best day," Caspian remarked over dinner. "If it hadn't been for that day, I wouldn't be here," Zenzile replied. That night, she stood on the terrace looking at the city lights. She thought about the path she had taken. If she hadn't gone to the OR that morning, if she had bowed down and apologized to the Duclairs, if she had gone back to Kellen out of fear of being alone, she might be living a different life, a life that looked quiet on the outside but was hollow on the inside. Caspian stepped out and stood beside her. "What are you thinking about?" "About how one closed door opened another." He took her hand and said nothing. "Some endings don't need applause. A warm home, someone waiting for you, and the peace of knowing you never have to justify who you are. That is enough." Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.